The encounter. John was a simple man, living alone in a small cabin deep in the forest. His life was quiet and predictable. Every morning, he would drink coffee on his porch, listening to the birds. Every evening, he would tinker with gadgets in his small workshop. But everything changed on that stormy night. The rain poured heavily, drumming against the windows of John's cabin. Thunder roared in the distance, and the wind howled through the trees. John was in his workshop, fixing an old radio, when a sudden flash of light lit up the sky. It wasn't lightning. It was something else, something strange. The light was bluish and pulsed like a heartbeat. Curious but cautious, John grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. The rain soaked him instantly, but he didn't care. His eyes were fixed on the forest ahead, where the strange light seemed to have landed. The air smelled like burning metal and wet earth. As he walked closer to the source, John's heart pounded in his chest. "What is that?" he whispered to himself. Then he saw it, a metallic object half buried in the mud. It wasn't an airplane or a helicopter. It was something entirely alien. The smooth, silver surface of the craft shimmered, even in the rain. Strange symbols glowed faintly along its sides. Before John could get a better look, a sudden movement caught his eye. From the wreckage, a tall figure emerged. It was a woman, or at least she looked like one. Her skin was silver, like the craft, and her eyes glowed faintly blue. She was taller than any human John had ever seen, and her long flowing hair seemed to sparkle like starlight. The woman staggered toward him, clutching her side. She looked injured. John froze, unsure of what to do. She spoke, her voice soft but urgent, in a language he couldn't understand. Then, as if realizing he didn't comprehend her, she switched to broken English. "Please, help me," she said, her voice trembling. "Danger, they come." John's instincts told him to run, but something about her eyes stopped him. They weren't the eyes of a monster or an invader. They were the eyes of someone desperate, someone afraid. Against his better judgment, he reached out to her. Before he could say anything, the woman collapsed into his arms. Her body was surprisingly light, almost weightless. He looked around, unsure of what to do. That's when it happened. A deep hum filled the air, and the alien craft emitted a strange pulse. John felt a jolt in his chest, like static electricity, and his flashlight flickered before going completely dark. In the distance, he saw the lights of his cabin also go out. The craft had knocked out all the electronics. "Great," John muttered. He glanced at the unconscious alien woman in his arms. "What have I gotten myself into?" Struggling against the rain and his rising fear, John carried her back to his cabin. He laid her gently on the couch and covered her with a blanket. She looked peaceful, despite her injuries, but John knew peace wouldn't last. Whatever she was running from would likely follow her. He lit a lantern and tried to think. Should he call someone? The military? The police? But what would he say? "Hello, I found an alien woman in my backyard." No one would believe him. Worse, they might take her away, and he had a feeling she wouldn't survive that. As he paced the room, John noticed something strange. The woman's wounds were healing on their own. The cut on her arm, which had been deep and oozing, now looked like a faint scratch. Her breathing became steady, and her glowing eyes fluttered open. "You saved me," she said weakly. John knelt beside her. "Who are you? What's going on?" She hesitated, as if trying to find the right words. "My name." The Plea. The cabin was eerily silent, save for the faint crackle of the lantern on the table. Zura sat on the edge of the couch, her glowing eyes fixed on the floor. Her silver hair shimmered faintly under the warm light, but her face was marked with exhaustion and fear. John leaned against the door, his arms crossed. He had so many questions, but he didn't know where to start. Finally, he broke the silence. "So you crash here, nearly destroy all my electronics, and now you tell me I'm in danger. What exactly is going on?" Zura looked up, her glowing eyes meeting his. "You are brave to bring me here," she said softly. "Most would not." "Brave or stupid," John muttered. "Depends on what you're about to tell me." Zura hesitated. "I am not like you," she began carefully. "My people are from another place, far beyond the stars. My ship was my home, my only escape." "Escape from what?" John pressed, his voice sharp. She looked away, her silver hands gripping the blanket tightly. "A war," she said finally. "A war that has lasted lifetimes. My people fight to survive, but the ones chasing me, they do not fight for survival. They destroy for power." John frowned, trying to process her words. "And now they're here, on Earth." "Not yet," Zura said, her voice trembling. "But they will follow my signal. They always follow." John's stomach tightened. "Why would they chase you all the way here? What makes you so important?" Zura took a deep breath, her glowing eyes filled with a mix of guilt and determination. "I carry something they want. Something they cannot have." "What is it?" John demanded. Instead of answering, Zura reached into a small compartment on her belt and pulled out a smooth black sphere. It was no larger than an apple, but its surface pulsed with faint golden lines. The air around it seemed to hum with energy. "This is the key," Zura said. "It holds knowledge, power, a way to end the war. If they take it, they will become unstoppable." John stared at the sphere, feeling both awe and unease. "And you brought it here, to my planet." "I had no choice," Zura said, her voice breaking. "My ship was damaged. I could not hide forever. Earth was a chance." "A chance for what?" John asked, his frustration growing. "To use us as bait." "No," Zura said sharply, her glowing eyes flaring. "I came here because I believed your kind could help. You are different." John scoffed. "Different how? We can't even fix your ship, let alone fight some intergalactic warlords." "You underestimate yourselves," Zura said quietly. "Humans, you are unpredictable. Resourceful. I studied your kind before I came. You fight for what you love. For home. For each other. That is why I came to you." John rubbed his temples, feeling a headache forming. "This is insane," he muttered. "What am I supposed to do? Build a spaceship in my garage?" Zura leaned forward, her voice urgent. "I don't need a spaceship. I need time. Time to repair the key, to hide its signal. If I can do that, they will lose my trail. And if they find you before that?" John asked grimly. Zura's silence was answer enough. John paced the room, his mind racing. He didn't trust her, not completely, but he couldn't ignore the danger she spoke of. If these enemies were as powerful as she claimed, Earth would be no match for them. And if she was right about the key, then helping her might be the only way to stop them. Finally, he stopped and looked at her. "What do you need to fix the key?" Zura's expression softened, as if she hadn't expected him to agree so quickly. "Your tools," she said. "Your knowledge. I will guide you." John sighed. "All right. But if this gets me killed, I'm blaming you." Zura managed a faint smile. "If it works, you will not regret it." Before they could say more, a low rumble echoed through the forest. John froze, his eyes darting to the window. The lights he had seen earlier were back, but now they were closer, too close. "They're here," Zura whispered, her voice trembling. John's heart raced. "How much time do we have?" "Not enough," Zura said. "They will not stop until they find me." John grabbed his flashlight and a wrench from his workbench. "Well, if they're looking for trouble, they've come to the wrong place." Zura looked at him, surprised. "You would fight for me, even knowing the danger?" John smirked. "Let's just say I don't like uninvited guests." The rumble grew louder, shaking the cabin. Zura stood, her glowing eyes narrowing with determination. "Then we must move quickly. They will test us, but together we will not fall." As the lights outside pierced the trees, John and Zura prepared for whatever was coming. In that moment, the line between man and alien blurred. It wasn't about who they were or where they came from. It was about survival. And they would face it together. The bond. The sun peeked over the horizon, casting soft light through the forest. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the air fresh but heavy with the scent of wet earth. Inside John's cabin, the tension lingered like an unspoken word. Zura stood by the window, her silver skin catching the morning light. She was watching the forest, her glowing blue eyes scanning for movement. "They're quiet for now," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Too quiet." John, sitting at his cluttered workbench. The attack. The night was unnervingly calm. The thin veil of mist blanketed the forest, muting the world outside John's cabin. Inside, the tension was palpable. John sat at his workbench, fiddling with a strange alien device Zura had given him to modify. Its faint hum filled the room, the only sound breaking the silence. "This will work," Zura said, standing by the window, her glowing eyes scanning the dark trees outside. "You sound confident," John muttered, not looking up from the device. "You sure these drones won't just blast through it?" Zura turned, her expression unreadable. "The disruptor you are building will confuse their systems. It will not stop them for long, but it will buy us time." "Time for what?" John asked, setting the device down. "Time for them to regroup and try again." "No," Zura said firmly. "Time for us to fight back." The weight of her words hung in the air. John wasn't a fighter. He was a man who fixed things, a man who avoided conflict whenever possible. But Zura's presence had changed that. Her determination, her refusal to give up, was contagious. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "All right," he said. "Let's assume this thing works. What happens after?" Zura hesitated, then said, "We prepare for the next wave." John groaned. "Fantastic. You're really selling this plan." Before Zura could respond, a high-pitched whine pierced the air, followed by a sharp metallic clang. The cabin lights flickered, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed the room. "They're here," Zura said, her voice low but steady. John grabbed a flashlight, its beam cutting through the shadows. "Drones?" he asked, his pulse quickening. Zura nodded. "Scout drones, small, fast, and deadly." "Deadly. That's just great," John muttered, grabbing a wrench from his workbench. "What's the plan?" Zura moved quickly, her silver skin glowing faintly in the dark. She handed John a small device, a palm-sized disc with glowing lines etched into its surface. "Place this outside. It will activate a perimeter shield." John hesitated. "And what happens if I don't get back in time?" Zura's eyes met his, serious and unflinching. "Then I will find you." Not exactly comforting, John thought, but he didn't argue. He pushed open the cabin door and stepped into the misty night. The forest was unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that made every small sound feel magnified. He could hear the faint whirring of the drones in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. "Hurry." Zura's voice crackled through a small communicator she had given him. John jogged to the edge of the clearing, his breath visible in the cold air. He placed the device on the ground and pressed the center. It lit up with a faint blue glow, humming softly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a shimmering dome of energy enveloped the cabin, flickering like a giant soap bubble. "Shields up," John whispered into the communicator. "Get back now," Zura's voice urged. "They are close." John turned to run, but froze as a small, hovering object emerged from the mist. It was sleek and black, no larger than a basketball, with glowing red sensors scanning the area. The drone emitted a sharp mechanical chirp, locking onto him. "Oh, come on," John muttered, raising the wrench defensively. The drone fired a burst of energy, narrowly missing him as he dove behind a fallen log. He fumbled for the small disruptor in his pocket, pressing its activation button. The device emitted a low-frequency pulse, and the drone wobbled in midair, its sensors flickering. "Take that, you tin can," John shouted, scrambling to his feet. But the victory was short-lived. Two more drones emerged from the trees, their red lights glowing ominously. John's heart raced as he sprinted toward the cabin, the drones hot on his heels. The cabin door burst open, and Zura stepped out, holding a sleek alien weapon. She fired a burst of blue energy, hitting one drone squarely in its sensor. It exploded in a shower of sparks. The second drone swerved, dodging her shots, but she moved with lightning speed, firing again and taking it down. John stumbled into the cabin, gasping for breath. "You're a terrible host, you know that." Zura closed the door behind him, her weapon still in hand. "And you are still alive. That is progress." The whirring sound outside grew louder. Through the window, John saw dozens of red lights moving through the mist, converging on the cabin. His stomach sank. "Please tell me you have a plan." Zura glanced at him, her expression calm but determined. "We hold them off. Together." John grabbed a makeshift weapon from his workbench, a metal pipe reinforced with alien tech Zura had given him. "All right," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Let's give them hell." Outside, the drones swarmed, their red lights glowing like eyes in the dark. Inside the cabin, John and Zura stood side by side, ready to face the storm. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for their newfound bond, for the fragile alliance they had built in the face of overwhelming odds. And neither of them intended to lose. The revelation. The cabin was in ruins. Smoke lingered in the air, and scorch marks covered the walls. Outside, the shattered remains of drones lay scattered across the clearing. The night's battle had been brutal, but John and Zura had survived. Barely. John sat slumped in a chair, his hands trembling as he inspected a deep gash on his forearm. "You call that holding them off?" he muttered, wincing as he wrapped the wound with a torn strip of cloth. Zura stood by the window, her glowing eyes scanning the tree line. Her silver skin was streaked with soot, and her movements were slower, almost hesitant. "They underestimated us," she said softly. "Next time, they will not." "Next time." John shot her a look. "I was hoping there wouldn't be a next time." Zura didn't respond. Instead, she turned her attention to a small device on the table, a spherical object that pulsed faintly with golden light. John had seen her handle it before, but tonight it seemed different, more alive. "What's that thing, really?" he asked, nodding toward the sphere. "You keep calling it a key, but I'm starting to think it's more than just some alien gizmo." Zura hesitated, her glowing eyes narrowing as she studied the device. "It is not just a tool," she admitted. "It is a vault, a repository of knowledge, power, and history." "History?" John raised an eyebrow. "What kind of history?" Zura sighed, as if the weight of the explanation was too much to bear. She picked up the sphere, holding it delicately in her hands. "This contains the collective memories of my people," she said. "Our greatest discoveries, our deepest secrets. It is the key to rebuilding what we have lost." John leaned forward, his curiosity outweighing his exhaustion. "And the guys chasing you, they want it for themselves. They want to erase it," Zura said, her voice low. "To wipe out every trace of who we were, so they can rewrite the story in their favor. If they succeed, my people will cease to exist, not just in body, but in memory." The room grew heavy with her words. John had always thought of war as something distant, something fought with guns and bombs. But this was something deeper, a war over identity, over existence. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" he asked, his voice softer now. Zura looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Would you have believed me?" John thought about it, then nodded slowly. "Fair point." As the tension between them began to ease, a faint beeping sound filled the room. Zura stiffened, her glowing eyes darting to the corner where a small holographic panel flickered to life. Strange symbols danced across the screen, accompanied by a low rhythmic hum. "What now?" John asked, standing. Zura moved to the panel, her expression darkening as she read the symbols. "It's a message," she said, her voice strained. "From who?" John pressed. Zura hesitated, then whispered, "From them." The screen shifted, and a shadowy figure appeared. Its face was obscured, but its voice was cold and mechanical. "Zura," it said, pronouncing her name like a curse. "You cannot hide forever. Surrender the key, and your punishment will be swift. Resist, and the humans will suffer for your defiance." John clenched his fists. "Well, that's subtle." The figure's gaze seemed to pierce through the screen, as if it could see them. "You have one cycle to decide. Choose wisely." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the cabin in silence. Zura stood frozen, her hands clenched into fists. John could see the fear in her eyes, but also something else. Determination. "They're bluffing," he said, trying to sound confident. "They don't even know where we are." Zura shook her head. "They don't need to. They will burn this entire planet if it means getting to me." John's stomach twisted. "Then we need to fight back," he said, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. "You said this key holds knowledge, right? Can it help us stop them?" Zura hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There is something. A weapon. But it is incomplete." "Incomplete?" John frowned. "What does it need?" Zura placed the key on the table, her glowing eyes meeting his. "It needs trust," she said. "Between us." John blinked, caught off guard. "Trust? What's that supposed to mean?" "The key is not just a machine," Zura explained. "It is alive, in a way. It responds to those who share its burden. Alone, I cannot unlock its full potential. But together, perhaps we can." John stared at her, his mind racing. He wasn't sure if he fully understood what she was asking, but he knew one thing. He couldn't walk away from this now. Not when the stakes were so high. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do this." Zura's lips curved into a faint smile, the first genuine one he had seen. "Then let us begin." As the key pulsed brighter, filling the room with a golden glow, John felt a strange sense of hope. It was fragile, like a spark in the dark, but it was enough. For now, the defense. The forest around the cabin was alive with sound, a deep, rhythmic hum that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. John stood on the porch, gripping a modified alien weapon Zura had hastily assembled from her ship's wreckage. The air was thick with tension, the kind that prickled the back of his neck. "They're here," Zura said from inside, her glowing eyes fixed on a holographic map that flickered on the wall. Red dots swarmed toward the cabin, their movements unnervingly precise. "Their ground forces will strike first. The drones are just the beginning." John let out a shaky breath. "Great. What's next?" "A mothership." Zura didn't respond. That silence told John everything he needed to know. Inside the cabin, the transformation was remarkable. The once cozy space now resembled a command center. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting alien devices to John's own makeshift contraptions. The disruptor he had built earlier buzzed with energy, forming an invisible barrier around the perimeter. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would slow the attackers down. "You sure this shield will work?" John asked, stepping back inside. "It will," Zura said firmly, "but only for a short time. When it fails, we must be ready." John glanced at the table, where a collection of tools, weapons, and alien gadgets were spread out. Some he recognized. Others looked like they belonged in a sci-fi movie. "What about a fence? We can't just sit here waiting to get overrun." Zura picked up a sleek, silver device and handed it to him. "This is a pulse launcher. It disrupts their neural circuits. Aim for their core." John inspected the weapon, his fingers brushing over the glowing blue symbols. You're really trusting me with this alien tech. Zura tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. You learn quickly. Besides, I have no choice. John nodded, trying to ignore the weight of her words. All right then, let's make these guys regret coming here. The attack began with a deafening roar. From the tree line, hulking figures emerged, machines that moved like predators. Their black, segmented armor glinted in the dim light, and their red eyes burned like coals. Behind them, smaller drones hovered, their sensors scanning for weak points. Ground units, Zura said, her voice calm but urgent. They will attempt to breach the barrier first. John raised the pulse launcher, his heart pounding. What happens if they do? They won't, Zura said, stepping beside him with her own weapon, a curved alien blade that pulsed with energy. Not if we stop them. The first machine slammed into the invisible barrier, sending a ripple of energy through the air. It reeled back, disoriented, and John seized the moment. He fired the pulse launcher, a bolt of blue energy striking the machine's core. It shuddered, sparks flying, before collapsing in a heap. Nice shot, Zura said, firing at a second machine. Her aim was precise, each strike hitting its mark. But for every enemy they took down, 2 more appeared. The drones were next. They hovered just beyond the barrier, firing concentrated beams of energy. The shield flickered, each hit weakening it. One drone managed to slip through, its red sensor locking onto Zura. Zura, duck, John shouted, diving forward. He tackled the drone midair, slamming it to the ground. Its sensor flashed angrily as it tried to self-destruct. Without thinking, John grabbed a wrench from his belt and jammed it into the drone's core. The explosion was small but powerful, sending him sprawling. Zura helped him up, her glowing eyes scanning him for injuries. You are reckless, she said, though her tone held a hint of admiration. Reckless keeps us alive, John shot back, dusting himself off. What's the next move? Zura pointed to a device near the cabin door, a small cylindrical object emitting a faint golden glow. That is our fallback. If they breach the shield, we detonate it. John frowned. Detonate? What happens to the cabin? It will be destroyed, Zura admitted, but it will take them with it. John hesitated, the weight of her plan sinking in. This cabin was his home, the one place he had ever felt safe. But now it was just another battleground. He nodded, his jaw tightening. All right, let's do this. The shield finally failed, collapsing in a burst of energy. The remaining machines surged forward, their weapons glowing ominously. Zura and John fought side by side, their movements almost synchronized. For every machine they destroyed, it felt like 3 more replaced them. We're running out of time, John shouted, firing his pulse launcher. Zura nodded, her silver blade slicing through a machine's armor. Prepare the device. I will cover you. John sprinted toward the cylinder, dodging enemy fire. He crouched beside it, his hand shaking as he activated the timer. The device began to hum, its golden glow intensifying. 30 seconds, John yelled. Zura fought with a ferocity he hadn't seen before, her movements almost graceful as she dismantled the attackers. But even she was starting to falter. One of the machines landed a blow, sending her sprawling to the ground. Zura, John shouted, running to her side. He fired his weapon, taking out the machine before it could finish her off. I am fine, she said, though her voice wavered. John helped her to her feet, his arm around her shoulders. The timer's set. We need to move. The two of them stumbled toward the tree line, the glow of the device growing brighter behind them. As they reached the edge of the clearing, the cabin erupted in a blinding explosion. A shockwave tore through the forest, vaporizing everything in its path. John and Zura hit the ground, shielding their faces from the heat. When the noise subsided, John looked up. The clearing was gone, replaced by a smoking crater. The enemy machines were obliterated. Zura sat up, her glowing eyes scanning the destruction. "It worked," she said softly. John let out a shaky laugh. "Yeah, but now I'm homeless." Zura turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. "You have my gratitude, John, and my trust." He met her gaze, his exhaustion melting into determination. "We're not done yet," he said. "Not until they're gone for good." Together, they stood, ready for whatever came next. The home. The forest was quiet again, but it wasn't the same. The clearing where John's cabin once stood was now a scorched crater. Smoke curled into the sky, and the faint hum of residual alien energy lingered in the air. John stood at the edge of the destruction, his face unreadable as he stared at the place he had called home. "It's gone," he muttered. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of pain in it. Zura stood beside him, her silver skin catching the light of the rising sun. Her glowing eyes softened as she looked at him. "You fought for more than this place," she said quietly. "You fought for something bigger." John let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, but it was nice having a roof over my head." Zura hesitated, then reached into the pouch at her side. She pulled out the key, the smooth black sphere that had caused all of this chaos. Its golden lines pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat. She held it out to him. "What am I supposed to do with that?" John asked, his brow furrowing. "You earned it," Zura said simply. "It is as much yours as it is mine now." John stared at the key, the weight of her words sinking in. "I don't even know what this thing really is," he said, "or what it means." Zura's gaze didn't waver. "It is more than knowledge. It is a chance to rebuild, to protect, to create something new. Together, we can use it to ensure they never return." John hesitated, then reached out and took the key. It felt warm in his hands, almost alive. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" he asked. "I have never been more serious," Zura said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But there is one condition." John raised an eyebrow. "Oh, great. What's the catch?" "You cannot do it alone," Zura said. "I will stay." John blinked, caught off guard. "You'll stay. On Earth?" Zura nodded, her glowing eyes steady. "I cannot return to my people. My ship is gone, and my home is lost. But here, perhaps I can find something new." John glanced at the key, then back at Zura. "You'd really give up everything for this?" "I already have," she said, "but I do not see it as loss. I see it as a beginning." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the battle, the loss, and the choices they had made hung heavy in the air. But there was something else, too. Something fragile but growing. A sense of hope. John finally nodded, a small smile breaking through his exhaustion. "All right," he said. "If you're staying, we've got a lot of work to do." Zura tilted her head, her faint smile widening. "Where do we begin?" John gestured to the crater. "Well, for starters, I'll need a new cabin. And maybe some alien upgrades, if you're offering." Zura chuckled softly, a sound that surprised them both. "Consider it done." The two of them turned away from the crater and began walking into the forest, the morning light filtering through the trees. In the distance, birds chirped, and the world seemed to breathe again. As they walked, John glanced at the key in his hand. Its golden lines pulsed steadily, as if in rhythm with his own heartbeat. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was building something that mattered. "You know what," he said, breaking the silence. "I never thought I'd be teaming up with an alien to save the world." "And I never thought I'd find a home among humans," Zura replied, her tone thoughtful. "Life is unpredictable." John grinned. "You have no idea." The forest closed around them, the shadows of the past giving way to the light of a new day. Together, they walked forward, not just as allies, but as companions, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. This wasn't just the end of a fight. It was the start of something extraordinary.